My name is Benajmin B. Olshin, and today I want to talk about a particularly interesting and relevant topic, and that is overseas Chinese students at U.S. universities, a geopolitical perspective. So I'm going to talk about students who come from China to the U.S. to study at various levels. And what I really want to talk about are certain points to consider. So these are questions we should be asking as universities, as institutions, about how well we work with Chinese students. So who am I? Well, I'm a consultant and a former professor of industrial design, and I've taught other subjects as well, both in Asia and in the United States. And I myself have had students from mainland China, Taiwan, and Hong Kong. And I've done also cross-cultural projects as well. I've worked in mainland China doing a cross-cultural design project, and I've worked in Taiwan as well doing cross-cultural marketing. So I've worked with young designers and students for many, many years now. So let's start with some statistics. So just last year, there were more than 300,000 Chinese students in the United States. And in fact, Chinese students account for over 25% of all the international students in the United States. Now, there are students at the graduate level, the undergraduate level, and even at private schools, at private secondary schools. So we have Chinese coming for a variety of learning experiences. And of course, we have to remember that there are also Chinese students elsewhere in the Anglophone world, in the UK, in Australia, Canada, etc. Now, it's interesting to look at this phenomenon historically. So it's what I call the initial motivations, because this goes back a long time. In fact, Chinese students have been coming to the United States since the 19th century. So why did they come originally? Well, the initial motivations were for science and technical training and engineering, and it was knowledge that China needed at the time to catch up, in quotes. And this was very similar to what happened in Meiji-era Japan. You had Japanese students coming to the US and also going to the UK, and they were interested in technical knowledge in this larger quest to catch up to the West in scientific and technical terms. Now, what's interesting is that current motivations are slightly more complex. There's a desire to learn about the West, not just in the West. That is, to learn about the West in more subtle ways than just what does the West have to teach us in terms of this scientific and technical knowledge. There are these sort of immaterial components as well. There's the question of what is the status of an American degree for me as a Chinese student? There's this chance to be exposed to a different culture. There's a chance to learn in different scientific and technical settings, again, not just the university itself, but research facilities and laboratories. There's a way to learn in English, so to be exposed to an English environment and immersed in that environment, which is a skill not just here, but also back in China. And also there are considerations of work, the possibility of working in the United States short or long term subsequent to finishing school, and then also different work possibilities once you leave the US as well as a Chinese student. Now, inside U.S. universities is really what we want to think about in particular here. So there's been this huge growth in overseas students over the past many decades, but particularly from East Asia. And this was driven in large part by an active recruitment by U.S. universities going to Asia, not just China, but also Korea and other countries. And this was seen as a revenue source for U.S. institutions because often overseas students would come and pay full tuition. Now, this is a logical approach. It makes sense. It's one of those things where everyone benefits, but it can also be problematic because we need to look at these overseas students as something more than a component of revenue.